Now, Epstein, guys, served as an operator for a larger network of oligarchs with extensive organized crime connects in addition to significant affiliations with intelligence agencies. This is that we know. We know that he's somebody who is related to trafficking, but also he's aided networks extensively in money laundering and other crimes as well, which are also financial. Diddy was acting on behalf of a specific oligarch network that directly overlaps with Epstein's. However, Diddy was used to influence a different industry completely, a different community completely, and for the benefits of these intelligence and organized crime connected oligarchs. Not only these, but there are major connects. Andre Harrell, Russell Simmons, and Clive Davis have all significantly helped and facilitate the rise of P. Diddy, bringing him into the music industry, but also are accused of helping Diddy to push him into the same activities that he's now in prison for pending his trial. MCA, which is the Music Corporation of America, and Arista Records, which helped build the success of Diddy's mentors, they also had connections to the same crime families that took out Melvin Combs. Melvin Combs is P. Diddy's father. Manipulated hip-hop to help benefit the private prison industry is basically what Diddy was used for as an asset. I'm going to repeat that again for you guys. He was sent to manipulate the hip-hop industry to help benefit the private prison industry. How would you even think that these two worlds connect? And these corporations' interest in Diddy was to help target not just the hip-hop community, but also the African-American community in general, specifically when it comes to America. Interesting, isn't it? Interesting. Now, let's look at P. Diddy's father, which I don't think we really discussed, Melvin Combs. Melvin Combs, guys, was gunned down in a car near Central Park West, and he was shot in the head with a point-blank range. An interview conducted by someone in Melvin's inner circle, he was about to inform on business deals to law enforcement, and therefore this expedited the murder of Melvin. Many speculated that even law enforcement, that Melvin Combs himself was a federal informant, and to be honest with you guys, like father like son, Diddy has also been accused of being an informant as well. Journalist Legs McNeil lays out how Melvin Combs had deeper ties to a crime family called the Gambino crime family, and at the end of his life, and they might have put out the hit on him. Melvin's ties to the Gambino and the Genoverse crime families seem to be reoccurring themes in articles from journalists and evidence of reported wiretapping and killing Melvin as they blamed him for these arrests. Melvin himself, obviously, working for particular crime families, which also worked for MCA, the link that Diddy worked under is significant in my opinion. And the rest of the video really goes to look at these connections with Diddy, with Epstein, and how they basically all work together. It's just going to continue to blow your mind, and I really wanted to just remind you guys of that. Now, if we look at P. Diddy's school, guys, where he went and attended was a grooming ground. Notably, whilst Diddy attended the all-boys Mount St. Michael's Academy, a major sex abuse scandal involving minor victims actually blew up that led to the indictment of 2 faculty members, which was brewing at the institution. The Maris brother, Timothy Brady, and the principal of MSMA for the entirety of Diddy's high school career, was arrested, charged, and sentenced to prison in 1988 for the abuse of 3 minor boys at the Catholic Academy in the Bronx over the course of 1987, which was the same year as Diddy's senior year. So, I had no idea that during the time that Diddy was actually attending this school, there was a huge scandal that broke out. Now my question is, if Diddy was potentially groomed by these men at this huge scandal at his school, considering his close peers were in the same age and class, is there now connection to Diddy's own interest for why he wants to work in schools? Because we know that Diddy actually wanted to have his own schools, he opened them up, he was with children. Was he trying to create his own grooming grounds because he saw what those men at his own school created, which was essentially a grooming ground? Makes you think, doesn't it? Now, how did Diddy become famous? Diddy was initially casted to be in a famous people's music video due to directors see him dancing great in clubs, one of them being Michael Jackson's videos. Both Michael Jackson and Diddy are surrounded by Zionist power brokers, one being Ron Burkle, which we've spoken about many times on this channel before. Ron Burkle is the godfather also to Diddy's children and also was a frequent flyer on Jeffrey Epstein's private Lolita Express jet. Boom. When it became to Diddy's Howard University, his reputation began his internship at Uptown Records, and Jessica Rosenblum introduced him to all of the freak spots in New York. Andre Harrell also hired him at Uptown. Andre Harrell left a huge influence on Diddy's love life. He hired uptown R&B singer Albie's Shaw's model girlfriend Kim Porter to work as a receptionist at the label. Diddy was immediately in love with her, loving the fact that he wanted to be with her. They would go on to have an on and off relationship spanning the years of 1994 to 2018, the time of her mysterious death after contracting a virulent case of lobar pneumonia. This is where Clive Davis comes into this. The hidden power behind Diddy's Bad Boy Records. Eventually, Andre Harrell felt that Diddy was getting too cocky in his position at Uptown and fired him. Nevertheless, the two remained friends, with Harrell becoming the godfather to Diddy's son Justin Combs, who was born later that year. Diddy, shortly after leaving Uptown, created Bad Boy Records with Kirk Burroughs in 1993, and Diddy's new label quickly entered into a distribution deal with Arista Records worth $15 million. Clive Davis says he met Diddy when Combs was just 23 years old, and that soon after meeting Clive Davis, he helped introduce Diddy to the right music executives who would assist him in ushering into the forthcoming of hip-hop revolution. Whilst Davis has been successful at CBS, he left the company, Clive Davis, specifically under a cloud of huge scandal, for those of you who might not know. Clive Davis became a focus of an investigation led by the American Attorney's Office in Newark, a probe that would later become known as Project Sound. As part of the investigation, allegations began to surface in the press that CBS Records had bribed black radio stations and done business with an organized crime figure. The scandal ultimately led to Clive Davis' decision to make a deal in 1971 with two record producers tied to Motown, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff. Clive Davis had sought out Gamble and Huff due to a desire to conquer the R&B charts. As part of the negotiations, Clive Davis allowed Gamble and Huff's companies to promote the music per deal, which was produced and distributed by CBS. Perhaps unknown to Davis at the time, but Gamble and Huff's company and its promotional efforts is engaged in the practice of payola, which is the illegal practice whereby firms pay radio stations to play singles without disclosing the payments that were made. CBS was therefore implicated in the arrangement through basically David Winshaw, Clive Davis's closest aide, and press reports soon stated that CBS music subsidiaries were being investigated for bribing radio stations, not just for the money, but also drugs and sex in order to increase use of its products on black-orientated radio stations. CBS, in connection with the Project Sound probe, uncovered that Clive Davis had left a trail of phony invoices totaling $100,000 over 6 years that was meant to cover up Clive Davis's use of funds for personal parties and renovations to his properties. Clive Davis was therefore ultimately fired by CBS as a result. Soon, the CBS payola scandal took on a darker hue, as in February 1972, a few days after Clive Davis had been fired from CBS, 8 people were indicted in Newark on a conspiracy and smuggling charges connected to a multi-million-dollar heroin ring operation in Italy, Canada, and the US. Despite the scandal, Clive Davis quickly found his way back into the industry. A little over a year after having been fired from CBS and Columbia, in the summer of 1972, Clive Davis was hired as a consultant for Bell Records. Arista's formation and success relied heavily on Alan Hirschfeld, a major entertainment executive who had recently become CEO of Columbia Pictures. Hirschfeld was instrumental in bringing Davis as a consultant for Bell and supported Clive Davis's formation of Arista, as well as Hirschfeld's family have framed Hirschfeld as having essentially co-founded the label with Clive Davis. Hirschfeld's father, Norman, was great friends with the owners who worked for Allen & Co., a firm. The Allen brothers had huge relations to crime circles. An organized network also linked to MCA. Morris Levi, Roy Coyne, and Leslie Wexner, as noted earlier in this piece. After the scandal around Diddy began to break, Clive Davis as well as Andre Harrell of Uptown and Russell Simmons have been accused of propelling Diddy into the patterns of criminal behavior for which he is now infamous for. For instance, one-time rival and former friend of Diddy, Suge Knight, has claimed that Clive Davis, Andre Harrell and Russell Simmons used alcohol, drugs, specifically cocaine, to compromise Diddy's manhood. This is particularly significant in the case of Clive Davis's close ties to the Dragola scandal, which involved using drugs and bribes to specifically target black-orientated radio stations and music. Claims similar to those made by Suge Knight have now been echoed by Diddy's former bodyguard, Gene Deal. Clive Davis's protege, L.A. Reid, who took over Arista Records from Davis, has also been accused of misconduct and assault. Reid, alongside Diddy, were both instrumental in the success of recording artists Justin Bieber and Usher. Suge Knight has argued that Clive Davis, Simmons, and Harrell first compromised Diddy, and then Diddy went on to use alcohol, drugs, and the gay sex scene to control younger artists like Usher and Bieber. Notably, Diddy's entry into the world of Andre Harrell, Simmons, and shortly thereafter Clive Davis coincides with the development of his obsessive drive to record everything, presumably for blackmail-related purposes. For instance, music video director Cole Bennett asserted that Diddy told him that he'd begun recording footage of everything in 1992 and advised Bennett to do the same. In addition, Kirk Burroughs, the co-founder of Bad Boy Records with Diddy, has claimed that Diddy sought to compromise him using the same method. Burroughs has filed a lawsuit against Diddy, claiming that Diddy subjected him to repeat sexual harassment, physical aggression, and forced compliance with degrading sexual acts. Throughout the 1990s, Burroughs claims that Diddy targeted him with unwanted sexual advances. However, Diddy may have been controlled in a similar way by Clive Davis per some sources. Suge Knight, for instance, has alleged that he was told by the former head of Interscope, Jimmy Iovine, that Diddy had regularly engaged in sexual acts with Clive Davis, suggesting that his relationship with Clive Davis and Davis early had crucial involvement with Bad Boy were built on the back of sexual favors. This is certainly possible given the well-known mechanism within the entertainment industry of sexual favors as a way to secure lucrative roles and deals. The Harvey Weinstein scandal. In addition, Davis notably came out publicly as bisexual in a memoir published when he was 80 years old, where he writes that he began to openly engage in sex with the same gender in the 1980s. Diddy's alleged bisexuality has been a major topic of discussion in relation to the scandal leading up to his arrest last year. Suge Knight has also claimed that Russell Simmons and Andre Harrell had also engaged in similar gay behavior with each other, notably the network behind Clive Davis, which overlaps with that behind Epstein, also involved similar sugar daddy-style relations. These include rumors that Epstein and his longtime benefactor Leslie Wexner were actually intimate. Former State of Hawaii Inspector General David told a journalist, Bob Fitrakis, that Epstein was Wexner's boyfriend. By 1986, CBS Records had come under the control of Lawrence Tisch, the billionaire head of Lowe's Corporation and a founding member of the Leslie Wexner and Charles Bronfman brokered megagroup, Leslie Wexner's then a tax attorney Arthur Shapiro, which led Columbus police investigators to link both Shapiro's death and Wexner himself to the Genovese criminal interest, always back to the crime families. Shortly after Shapiro's death, Jeffrey Epstein entered into Wexner's inner circle, tasked with getting Wexner's finances in order. The Rat Pack of Andre Harrell, Russell Simmons, and P. Diddy, where Russell himself began facing a slow onslaught of SA lawsuits, is what we all know about. Ultimately, in tracing the network in which Diddy had become deeply enmeshed by the early mid-1990s, we are left with deep connections to intelligence-linked elements of organized crime. The same networks of organized criminals also played a key part in enabling the activities of sex criminal and intelligence asset Jeffrey Epstein, from at least the 1970s onwards, as detailed in the book One Nation Under Blackmail. With such connections, the question then becomes, what did the group seek in someone like Sean Combs, and more broadly in exerting its influence over the entertainment industry and specifically the African American music? While speculative, it appears that various connections always lead back to Music Corporation of America, and its influence can help us arrive at one unsettling possibility. During this period, not only was MCA a dominant force in entertainment, but Lawrence Tisch, throughout his 1985 takeover of CBS, controlled another key branch of the music industry through 1995. With the Bronfmans taking over MCA and later Def Jam and Warner Music, the influence of the so-called mega-group billionaires over the music industry became extremely significant during the 1990s, with Diddy teaming up with Clive Davis with significant ties to the same network to form his own label. This tiny group of billionaires had the ability to shape hip-hop, the cultural engine of the African-American community, in major ways. The same year that Bronfman and Tisch clans formally joined with Leslie Wexner and others like MCA linked Steven Spielberg via the mega group, American record labels had allegedly begun to conspire to promote crime in hip-hop lyrics, with the ostensible goal of facilitating the filing of private prisons, as those that ran the record labels were allegedly deeply connected to private prison firms. That is insane. The record labels are connected to private prison firms. An account from an anonymous industry insider details how in 1991 he was invited to a clandestine meeting where he was forced to sign an NDA. He recounted the events of that meeting as follows. We were told that these prisons were built by privately owned companies that received funding from the government based on the numbers of inmates. The more inmates, the more money the government would pay by these prisons. It was also made clear to us that since these prisons are privately owned, as they become publicly traded, we'd be able to buy shares. Insane. In addition, prominent rappers have claimed that from the 1990s onwards that the music industry is financially entangled with the private prison industry and encouraged criminal behavior through hip-hop due to those entanglements. This would then lead to more criminal behavior, thus more people in prison, thus more money. Harry O would have become a silent partner in Death Row Records with Suge Knight, Dr. Dre, the DOC, and corrupt defense lawyer David Kenner. This is significant to the story and the Sean Diddy Combs investigation at large, as not only was Death Row an intelligence front, but it was also teeming with dirty cops and corrupt informants who've been assigned to moonlight as security guards at the label for drugs, weapons dealings, informing and COINTELPRO purposes. This includes intentional sabotage of the Blood and Crips gang truce, both gangs with which Harry O intimately collaborated in his crack distribution efforts, as well as the Cali cartel, and the fabricated and exploitation of the East vs West rap feud that would ultimately lead to the seemingly government-sanctioned murders of both activist rapper Tupac and Biggie, operations in which both Sean Combs and Suge Knight played pivotal roles in. These music industry organized crime, intelligence and federal law enforcement connections are also hugely significant as Death Row, in conjunction with Diddy's Bad Boy Records, which was one of the primary Trojan horses by which gangster rap was injected into the culture, often at the expense of more radical, activists or outright hip-hop acts who, if they refused to cater to the whims of certain record executives, would see their commercial prospects suffer. One of the mechanisms for this dissemination of drug and crime glorifying culture was the cruel and deliberate coercion and corruption of conscious rappers. Given the above, all the elements of a perfect storm to perpetuate mass incarceration of African Americans were put into place along the same timeline and many of those same actors. These actors deeply tied to the CIA and organized crime. When we add the alleged efforts to stoke violence in hip-hop as exemplified by Diddy and his Bad Boy Records after he had become enmeshed in this very network as well as his West Coast rivals, we have yet another component that suggests that this network used its influence over the hip-hop industry to socially engineer criminal behavior whilst also ensuring that cheap, addictive drugs and cheap guns simultaneously flooded urban African American communities. Wow. The MCA and CI connected Wackenhut would have reaped mass profits from this apparent operation, as the number of prisoners in its private prisons absolutely swelled. However, other major multinational corporations who utilize inmate labor form these prisoners also benefited. A litany of American companies like Walmart and Microsoft are amongst those who have a long history of profiting handsomely from inmate labor. Several of these corporations include companies run by the mega group billionaires like Lester Crown's General Dynamics, a major military contractor, and Leslie Wexner's Victoria's Secret. It all relates. This context certainly zooms out significantly from the specific Diddy scandal that began to unravel at the end of 2023. However, it also helps us understand this case. Why? Because Diddy appears to have been brought into a network where he was controlled through sex and drugs and then made a celebrity. And as a celebrity, he used his own music, his record label and his influence to control other upcoming rappers and musicians while also helping shape the future of hip-hop towards that allegedly sought by music industry executives and their partners, the CIA, the mob and the private prison industry. Diddy from the early 1990s onward appears to have been a key frontman for this network and its ambitions. He was likely not the sole mastermind of beneficiary of all of the scandalous parties, violence and public promotion and alleged blackmail in which he engaged. He was a product of a network and a system that, in the case of Diddy, was seeking to target and corrupt the broader African American community in similar ways. Diddy, like some other prominent entertainers, was servile to his music industry masters. He worked within a system those masters ultimately controlled and wanted to expand their own influence and power within that system. But at the end of the day, he was never in charge. Diddy was never in charge. Whilst Diddy publicly projected power and success, both of those things were conditional, and like Epstein, now exposed, he is due to take the fall in order to take the heat off the people behind the curtains.